Welcome back to the third and final, or for now at least, How We Document panel discussions. So we've had two of these amazing panel discussions with some very, very smart people so far. And if you missed any of those, then you can find them over at zeroheight.com/blog or on our YouTube channel. If you do a search for Zeroheight, they should come up. But today we're talking about tokens. So tokens are one of the newer kids on the block, I suppose, when it comes to design systems, and a bit of a hot topic at the moment. However, it's not just the technical implementation or which plugin to use that we should be talking about. I think tokens touch on a deeper need in design systems, which is all about bridging that gap between design and engineering. We face some big governance challenges with tokens, as well as making sure that what we're building, using, and implementing is future-proof. Hello, standardization. We'll touch on a whole range of these topics and more with our lovely panelists, Donald and Kaelig Deloumeau-Prigent. Is that close?
Nice one, dude.
There we go. There we go. But before we do, I should let them introduce themselves. So, Dan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, how are you doing? I'm Dan. I'm currently content and experience lead at AutoTrader. Over the last couple of years, we've got a far more mature design system built from tokens up through React components and Figma library, getting a nice tight little package going. So all the things we've learned around governance and just communication is just a massive part of it, which took us to tokens.
Brilliant. And Kaelig, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, my name is Kaelig. I am a husband and a proud dad of two little girls. Right now, I am enjoying a nice sabbatical, coming to the end of it after 6 months of leaving Shopify, where I was working on the design system and the design tokens over there. My introduction to design tokens was in 2015 when I was working on Gina's team at Salesforce. And she was obviously a huge advocate for design tokens there. Hey, chat. Can't wait to get your questions later. Do ask the hard questions. Put us on the spot. It's going to be fun.
It's also worth mentioning that you are the co-chair for the W3C community group on design tokens, aren't you?
That is right. Yes. We're working on building a specification that will help with interoperability between all these tools that you've been using to design, but also with your code.
Yeah. Brilliant. And finally, I suppose I should introduce myself. For those who don't know me, I'm Luke. My pronouns are he, they. And I'm the design advocate lead at Zeroheight, which is the design system documentation platform. You probably know that. And we're also the lovely folks behind the How We Document report. I'm also the host of DesignOps Island Discs podcast, which Kaelig has been a guest on before, and the co-chair of DesignOps Assembly London, Design Club London, and co-organizer of WDC conference out in Bristol, UK. I also sleep once in a while, but not very often. So for the format today, I'm going to kick things off with a few questions from our side, and then at the half-past mark, we'll switch things around and get some questions from the folks in the audience. If you'd like to pose a question, if you're watching today and you'd like to ask a question, please do so either by using the Q&A function in Zoom or using the webinars channel in Zeros, our Slack community. If you haven't signed up to Zeros yet, you can do so. I'll ask Jules or Connie if you can post in the chat the link to sign up to Zeros. That'd be great, because I forgot to do that and I've already taken the QR code down. Also, the lovely Jules and Connie from Zeroheight will be moderating these questions and passing them up to me so that I can ask Dan and Kaelig. I also sure that it goes without saying, but if we can keep things nice and civil within the chat, that would be good. We all need to be good human beings. We operate a safe, inclusive space here, so any harassment or general not niceness won't be tolerated. And if you need to flag anything to us, the best way to do that is to email us at community@zeroheight.com or to message Jules in either Zoom or in Zeros in Slack. So, without further ado, let's kick off. So the first question, and I'll ask Dan first. What would be your biggest piece of advice for any team implementing design tokens today?
Think really carefully about why you think you need them. So the danger is that you could charge into doing something that you don't fully understand the benefits of, I guess. And so they are the kind of thing that always pictured being the bedrock of everything else that you do. You can do things out of sequence. You don't have to do everything in a prescribed way. So be quite clear on where they can add value for you. Understand what they are before rushing in.
Yep, that makes sense. Kaelig, would you like to add anything or any other piece of advice?
Yeah, I think it's a team sport. I've seen some teams implement design tokens in silos, like designers doing having a certain naming convention for their colors and spacing and typographic scales, and then on the other end, developers thinking about the exact same thing but in a separate way. And this is not what design tokens is about. Design tokens is about creating a shared language, so working together and not just looking at the operational excellence, efficiency on the engineering side and the kind of shared language on the design side. You need to come together and build that together. So for me, that's my main advice, is to start by working together. And when you have a slightly more mature design system, I would say, when you have content strategists, UX researchers, even some design systems have taxonomists, you can even add more people to the mix and start thinking about how do we even research how that can resonate with the design systems users, and yeah, so that's make it a team effort.
I'm curious on that, because you said you were talking about how when design systems do get more mature, do you think that there is a point where implementing tokens does make sense? Is it something that you should be thinking about from day one, or is it something that you should maybe, worry about some of the more foundational, fundamental stuff before you get into it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons why you should use design tokens, and I don't see a lot for not using them. That said, I think, yes, there are a certain level of maturity. Like, how many platforms does your system serve?
Mm-hmm.
You need to, how much manual work is there for each release of the design system for Android, iOS apps, the web apps that you serve? How much maniacal work happens? How can you make that happen faster and more smoothly? So that's like the operational excellence and efficiency part of the equation. And then if you have a big team and a lot of product teams, you definitely need tokens to start thinking about typography, even device sizes the same way, and kind of codify those decisions at the more macro level, so that communication between design and engineering happens in a super smooth way rather than being like full of friction and micro roadblocks along the way. So I would say, just like Dan, I think, was pointing to the fact that you don't have to dial it up to 11. You can totally start small, start codifying some base foundational decisions without totally going like full material design with hundreds of tokens, or even thousands of tokens in some design systems. So there's a bit of a scale there you can go for.
Wait,
Exactly.
you don't?
Sorry, I was just going to
Go
say,
on.
I think it links really nicely with what Kaelig was saying about all that governance and the conversation around it. That's fundamentally the most important thing, is that communication part. And if you're talking about taxonomy, don't rush ahead and try and do 100 things. Just start super simple and think where you can get some value. So if you think design tokens are really important, then get a lot of different people together and just go, what should we call these colors? Because it's not necessarily about what you call them straight away. It's about how you form that decision in the first place. Who's in the room? How do you then keep making good decisions? How do you give yourself space to change if you want to change things in future? Because, again, like Kaelig was saying, if designers over here have named things one way, go, cool, we've nailed the tokens, and then no one else knows what they are or feels excluded from the process, it hasn't really fulfilled its objective, I don't think.
Well, I think it's funny, actually, because I think I did have a question around advice on naming conventions, but I think when it comes down to it, it's actually, you can use whatever naming convention you want as long as the teams agree and there is conversation between the teams, right?
Yep.
It's interesting that you touched on that governance point. I'm really interested to like dive into. Have you had any challenges with the governance around tokens, and sort of whether you can talk to that and any advice that you'd give around that governance piece? So I think it's really interesting to sort of, it's a knotty area that I think needs to be sorted out in a lot of places.
I can only speak from our experience, and we're not super mature in terms of tokens, but we're going through a huge rewrite, which takes us from the core basic tokens into something far bigger.
Yeah.
But again, it's like they are fundamental to everything, but you have to allow them to change.
Yeah.
And so if you take them as something that once you've carved them in stone, you can never touch them again, that's really problematic. But if you can form consensus and go as a collective, whatever shape that might be, this feels right. Then the next time a decision is made for all the right reasons, then you need to roll with that change and go, okay, well, where we are now is that we've recognized we've got a new requirement, a new need. Maybe there's a different set of people now. So how can we move it on in the right way and do it, all that communication stuff, completely upfront, completely transparent. So it's a joined up thing.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's interesting because I do think that there's a lot of the problems that arise when people start talking about tokens come from this. It might be a bit strong to call it this, but a lack of trust between design and engineering that does exist out there. And I think a large part of that is to do with, there's been a lot of design tools out there that have claimed to be able to spit out production ready code, which is never actually a thing. Do we think that this is still an issue, this like lack of trust? And I suppose how do we get around this? Especially I'm curious from like a design point of view, because that's where I found that the problems arise when it's a design team wanting to implement something like tokens and the engineering team either don't understand or aren't fully on board. How do we get around this lack of trust, and especially when we're sort of trying to sell in something like tokens? Kaelig, I'm wondering if...
No, I have thoughts. Yeah. Well, I don't really like the way the question is framed. So I'm gonna kind of hijack it and say there's a need for transparency, and just to kind of link with how we were talking about governance. Yeah. I think there's a need for transparency and accountability. So and a bit of agency as well when it comes to how do we modify those tokens, who is empowered to do so. So how do decisions happen? Not just these are the decisions and they're written in stone kind of thing, which is if you don't have the right tooling in place, the right culture in place around tokenization, that's what's going to happen. They're going to be set in stone and nobody's going to dare to change them for better or worse. And so having the right tooling behind that is powering this is super important. And then having shared tooling, because it's nice to have a tool that designers can use or a tool that engineers can use, but it's way better when you have one tool that both disciplines can use, even content designers, even UX researchers, etc. should have that access. So shared tooling, important, shared principles, and then we're in how we document webinars. So documenting how, or having at least some traceability of how did this token happen to be? When was the last time it was changed? Why was it changed? Was it an accessibility issue? Did we want to change this because the brand moved along and there was a color change, for example? So this is super important. That tooling it's not easy to put in place today. There are tools out there that help you with that. But I haven't seen that many design systems having that kind of documentation hygiene behind design tokens, aside from showing the tokens. So, so that I want to preface my point with that. And then I don't know if there's a lack of trust between design tools and how design tools operate and how design teams use them and the engineering side. I would say that maybe there's been some design tools overselling their capabilities. It's possible. That said, I also see products being built with kind of low code and no code design tools at this time that are really awesome. I won't name names because I don't want to kind of out the others for not doing it the right way. But I can tell you that I've met some amazing teams recently. Over the past 6 months, I've tried to meet as many design tool and developer tool makers and founders out there. And I think the maturity is getting there. I don't know if I would use them to build production, like very high scale stuff for now, but I think it's getting there. So I want to say that. And then when it comes to more like traditional design tools such as Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, they're not trying to ship to production. So it's a totally different space. And they're like, hey, creativity must happen there. And to do that, we need super short feedback loops in the design space. And then engineering can happen slightly separately. And they're trying to create bridges with APIs and plugins. But so anyway, I don't know if there's a lack of trust, but I mean, I can see where you're coming from, but I don't look at the space like this personally.
I think there's also a thing of whether there's trust or not. A lot of this stuff is really a people problem. So regardless of the tools and whether you use tokens or not, how you use them and stuff, very often it's like, certainly from my observations, there's an opportunity with getting involved in design systems at all to try and bring people together. It can be quite powerful if done that way, and tokens are the perfect vehicle for doing that, because you, like we were saying before, you need that joined up thinking and that joined up responsibility. So if you almost put the tooling and tokens to the side, it's like that is one of the key things you can get out of this. Bring people together, and instead of being designed over to engineers, like, well, you're design system people.
Yeah.
You've got your specialisms, but when we're in it together, we're in it together.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think that there's a little bit of a lack in, because I think you're 100% right, by the way. I suppose what I think about when I'm thinking about like governance when it comes to a lot of design system stuff actually is that we have really strong governance models when it comes to the dev side of things and the engineering. So it's interesting what you were talking about, Kaelig, where you were talking about those short feedback loops in design tools to kind of foster creativity. But I still feel like there's potentially something missing a little bit on the design side when it comes to some kind of more just slightly stricter governance. But we're seeing advances in that with things like branching in Figma and abstracts years ago coming out with some of like the versioning and approval workflows with Sketch. And it's funny because I feel like, I don't know, I'm wondering whether this is an area that is needed with tokens, and if there is, maybe, as I said, maybe it was a bit strong to talk about a lack of trust, but if there is that lack of trust with accepting those kind of things from designers, whether that kind of, more defined governance process and defined sort of workflows would help there. And that's where I feel like there is a bit of a gap in tooling at the moment. I don't know. Would you agree with that?
I can agree with that. One thing it reminds me of is seeing teams. Well, first of all, I want to say I totally agree with you that the branching model and I feel like, so it's basically what I want my next adventure to be, is to bring more DevOps into UX and more design thinking into infrastructure and platform engineering teams, so that then the front end folks and the people at that kind of junction between engineering and design can build better together. Yeah. And so I just want to plug that. I totally agree. I'm just looking for my next adventure right now. It's always good to remind people that, and another thing is that I do agree that the tooling is not there. It's emerging. There are quite a few teams right now that are thinking about how to build those tools that are interoperable between all the design tools and are kind of acting as this single source of truth for design tokens. One of the first ones was Design System Manager by and Brand AI by the folks at Envision, and then nowadays there's a few more. I don't want to name them to not out the other ones, but essentially I want to kind of clap on the first ones that kind of open the the road. And then so it has to do with tooling, has to do with culture. It reminded me of is how I've seen teams where developers were not empowered to push back on certain design tweaks. Not necessarily, I don't know if pushback is the right way to say it, but essentially adding a lot of one-off values in their CSS because the design was not exactly using the design tokens, or even didn't have design tokens. It's like, oh, there's 17 pixels between of margin between this text and the side of the box. And then when you have design tokens, a developer, with the right culture in place, a developer could come back to the designer and could be like, hey, we don't have 17 pixels in our token system. Did you mean X? Like, did you mean 17, 16? Did you mean 18? And when it's actually an appropriate value, and when you actually wanted 17 pixels, then you can have that discussion of this is deliberate. This is why we're using a different shade of a blue that doesn't exist anywhere else, or this is why we're using that spacing value. So I feel like design tokens are a catalyst for this to happen in a better way. Yep. Or in very functional teams, what I love is how designers can just say, hey, it's not pixel perfect, just use the tokens. And don't have to go super high fidelity all the time, and make let the developers interpret the design and create in the browser, and then have that feedback loop then of refining later on in the browser, instead of all the refinement happening in the design tool.
So I'm aware of time, because I know we do need to switch it over to audience questions in about 8 minutes. And I know you just answered a question, Kaelig, but I've got one more for you, if that's okay. At least one more. Especially as part of your work with the W3C community group, and there is this ongoing work to standardize tokens. I'm just curious, like, what do you feel at the moment is like the biggest blocker to standardization, or the biggest challenge that you've got ahead when it comes to standardization?
Yeah, so I want to point out first, as a disclaimer, the W3C umbrella is, we're not creating a W3C standard, and is what I want to put out there, just to be clear. The reason why we're operating under the umbrella of W3C is because of intellectual property, and that means that anybody who contributes to the specification will give away their intellectual property rights to the group, so and I mean to the open. Essentially, there's a whole legal framework around it, and it's so useful to make sure that tomorrow Sketch or Figma or Adobe doesn't decide to create a patent around design tokens, and that we all have to pitch in every time we say the word or use it in our systems. So the biggest blocker, I would say. So we've assembled this great team of so many experts in the field who are looking at how do we create the best JSON schema and system to create interoperability between design tools when sharing design tokens between design tools and code. And it turns out there's so many corner cases. So many teams are doing different things, and we're trying to address the first, like, most needed issues that teams are facing. So on our team, we've got folks from Amazon, Google, Adobe, and those folks have very complex systems. So we're trying to go back down to where our teams currently struggling, so that we don't address those like super like high scale issues too early, and empower teams that actually need it. So for me, that's the biggest blocker right now, is to keep fostering that empathy towards teams beginning in the space, while also allowing the format to scale for bigger use cases. And it's such a hard balance to find. Every time we put out an idea out there, we're very transparent about how we meet every 2 weeks. There's so much interesting discussion happening, and then but what about X? What about Y? What if I want to name this with like an accent in my token name? How would that compile to CSS? Do we want to allow this? All these teeny tiny corner cases are very, very hard to take into account without going down the rabbit hole of not shipping anything. But yeah, we're super close to getting a second editor's draft out, and I think it's going to be a call for implementation from design tool vendors very soon. So I'm super excited. We don't have like big blockers. This is more like how we spend our time is very much on these corner cases.
It's super interesting. I mean, to be honest, I was asking that from a purely selfish point of view, just because I'm very interested in it. So, but I'm hoping that other people found it as interesting as I did. So before we switch it over, Dan, I've got a nice big chunky question for you. So obviously, tokens, one of the newer kids on the block, as I said, around sort of like tooling and automation. I was just wondering if there's any other sort of automation or tooling aspects of design systems that you're particularly excited about or you think are missing generally.
That is a chunky one. Well done. I think one thing that we discovered even before we tried a proper design system was that end-to-end workflow is massively important. So you've kind of hit on a few things about, especially Figma with branching and stuff. That's all cool. With what we've done on the engineering side of our design system now, it's not perfect, but what we tried to do was start with the feeling of it pushing out. So it would version and then trigger builds everywhere, but there's still that gap. And so I think, again, it comes into governance where even if, using Figma as an example, even if you could say, right, spit out the tokens, now how do we consume them? There are ways you could fudge that. There's ways you could probably, with loads of plugins, make something happen. But there needs to be some kind of manual intervention there to say, this is a deliberate change. This is why that change is happening, like Kaelig was saying. And so you've got that accountability, which feels a bit like a Git log in some ways. And so those worlds really converge at that point. And that's the missing bit. So how do you get it to play nice? Is it one directional? Is it bidirectional? So if a change is made in code, should it nicely be consumed back by the design tool? It's really not a very coherent world. So if you use tokens and you say, I'm a designer, I've looked after, meticulously curated these tokens, here you go. What happens? Even if you use lots of stuff and you actually generate the JSON in a really good way, somebody then has to check it into Git or something needs to happen next. And so that can be quite broken. And I'm not sure there's a perfect solution from that, but again, there's movement towards that space.
Yeah, I think you just got me very excited then as a concept. So I'm thinking that if we can maybe just Dan and Kaelig, us three can just go off and build these things, if that's okay.
I've got half an hour.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about that DevOps kind of part of the process. So that's a feedback loop that takes time. It's less time than doing it manually, for sure. So I applaud those efforts. That definitely is the way things should be going. And then at the local level, how do you test your change so that you can see what the impact is across all platforms, dark modes, high contrast modes, all of these things? Is there a world in which you could just save a token and you could see it happen, on all your devices, tablets, browsers, apps at the same time? And there was a company who built that. They were just sold, I think, during the pandemic. But and so I'm excited to see tools that allow that kind of super short feedback loop. You change it in Figma, you see it happen everywhere, kind of thing.
I think even before you've actually done it, it's just, by the way, when you change this, the scale of impact might be how big. Just so you've got that kind of forewarned thing of, you sure you want to do that? Everything's
we called it the splash zone at Shopify.
I mean,
how much are you splashing the bath water? Is it gonna go over? Is it gonna? It's gonna have ripple effects and waves that you did not really think about, And
I think a lot of people don't even think that this is a problem because they're working on, relatively small design systems. But it's as soon as you start scaling your design system, I mean, we've seen some implementations where not only are you dealing with like what you were talking about, like high contrast mode and dark mode or whatever, you're talking about 50 different themes for different implementations of the sort of the design system. And it is one of those things where it's like you could easily change a token and that splash zone could be the size of Greater London. uh, and so yeah, it's I think that's very exciting. I'd love to see those tools. So if you can just actually share which tool that was in the chat, that'd be great. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to hand it over to some audience questions now. We've already got a few here, and I'm going to get through as many of these as possible. So apologies if yours does not get read out. So we were talking about earlier about creating that culture with the development teams, and making sure that you're fostering that sort of correct culture that will make something like tokens easy to implement. Do you have any advice for creating that culture when you have lots of disparate developer teams? And any examples of maybe where that falls down, or any war stories you've got, as well as anything that you've learned to fix it?
I can start because I have seen I have come across some issues when trying to scale with mobile teams, and it's just the culture of trust between mobile teams and the design system and the UX team was not necessarily, the communication channels were not necessarily the best, and it had to be created. There wasn't much pairing happening between the design system team and the mobile teams. Nobody's fault. Like, it's just the organizational structure was not built to optimize for that, because it didn't have to be for a very long time. And so when trying to scale tokens and enter into their build system and be like, hey, here's a dependency we created for you. And some teams don't even have package management because they want to vet every single dependency individually, and they don't want to have that automated versioning behind it. So for me, that's been one of the issues. But aside from that, with web teams, typically I've tried to put in like drop-in replacement systems so that it doesn't disrupt their workflow and they don't really realize they're using tokens. It's just the way we build, kind of thing.
It sounds like, I mean, it's a weird concept. The communication might be one of the answers here. And it's something that's come up quite a lot in previous panels, where it's, I think, one of the things that can really help is making sure that the people who are working on this are very strong advocates for what they're doing and very good at communicating outwards, right? Or at least having somebody there who is good at communicating outwards and making sure that there is that cross communication.
Yeah, and also I think maybe setting incentives that allow for that to happen. Like, what do you get high fives for in your team? Do you get high fives for getting adoption from iOS and Android, or is your team focused on the web products? And then, that's what gets you forward and what gets people excited around you, what gets your manager excited. So sometimes it's just the way the organization works and the incentives are set doesn't really push for that scale. So yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
Cool. I did a little bit of a write-up of our process, so I'll drop the link in the chat if anyone wants to read that, because the people bit is hard, man, and that's just our story.
Well, on that, actually, I've got another question here that I'd love to hear your take on, Dan. How do you cope with team disagreements on what is good enough in terms of those, in terms of like quality standards? So if you're talking about those three stakeholders of engineering, product, and design, and all of them being very opinionated and having their own views, what are some ways that you've found? Oh, sorry, very loud car going past. What are some ways that you've found to help with those disagreements? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a maturity issue?
Just speaking for us, again, what we've got is not perfect. It's always going to mature all the time, as these things do. But I think that end-to-end workflow, again, was a big piece of it. We also drew up a manifesto right at the beginning, which was just like 8 or 9 bullet points just to kind of concisely communicate what even the design system was for and what we were trying to get out of it. Just really high level stuff. And I think, again, that way the pipelines all worked, part of that was going back to one of the things in the manifesto about confidence. And so if you know something is imperfect, but you can follow it up within minutes, then you have a greater degree of confidence than if you have to vet something very, very seriously before it goes anywhere. We also make sure that as a stakeholder, testers were a part of the process. That's test engineers in terms of automation, as well as manual testers, like just get their input, if nothing else. And so what did confidence mean? And so some of that was like, well, if you follow straight up with a fix, brilliant. We know that if the worst happens, we can fix that. And so being quite clear on where you get confidence from and where the potential risks are is really important.
Yep, definitely. Kaelig, somebody has asked, they would say that they would love you to expand a little bit more on what you were talking about before around good documentation hygiene around tokens. Anything you can do, sort of, what are some of the things that you can do beyond just publishing a massive list of the token names and values?
Yeah. So one of the things we've been thinking about when creating that specification is how do we nudge people towards not just building a database of names and values to document their design decisions, but also add a little bit of description or comment about why this thing exists. And I've found it very useful in prior teams to, the brand colors, maybe you don't need to explain them. It's the brand colors, I guess. I mean, maybe the brand team would have thoughts on how to document that. I'm not a branding designer, so a brand designer, so I don't know about this stuff. But when it comes to semantic tokens, why, when, how to use the token that has to do with danger and warning. What about certain text color tokens or background color tokens, and how is there any bit of documentation, or can you point people towards how to use them appropriately, or when in doubt, can they go to your documentation and think, okay, there's 7 tokens with the same value, they have different names, because semantic tokens often fall into that category. How do I use the most appropriate one? And when you have hundreds of tokens, it becomes so useful to have these docs. So this is kind of what I mean when I think about documentation hygiene. And then what I was saying, and I think Dan said it the best way, there's a bit of a git log or release notes for the tokens that describes why, or at least allows you to click to a pull request or click a link somewhere that tells you this is where the thing changed, this is why it changed, and kind of go back to how those decisions were made. It doesn't seem that useful when you create the system, but when it's 2 years down the road and your company has totally shifted priorities, the team size has grown like 4-fold, all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, that's nice that we had this documentation to understand why and how those decisions were made. And yeah.
Especially when you have turnover on the team or new people starting as well, like you end up not having to have those. I mean, to be honest, I just think audit trails on pretty much everything to do with product would be good. But
yeah.
It's but it's you end up not making the same decisions and having the same conversations, and to be honest, quite often making the same mistakes over and over again.
And you will end up deprecating tokens as well. It's something we didn't really talk about, but there's a life cycle to a token. Every time you create a token, you have to think about, okay, if down the road we were to undo this decision, what would it look like? And having a bit of a process in place for that and documenting it is so important so that people understand the value behind upgrading to the latest version and making those changes. Otherwise, all you're doing is being a dependency, and down the road in a few years you might not be seen as well, and that trust might erode. So yeah
I love that concept, by the way, of the interlinked tokens with the documentation that's associated with the token, saying that I think not enough documentation sites do particularly well. I know it's something that there's some really interesting thoughts out there at the moment that I'd love to see some good implementations of. I think Chase McCoy from Stripe and used to be at Seeds, the Sprout Social design system, has a really great article on turning our documentation into a like web of information that's all interlinked, which I think is super cool.
The system graph, the component graph, the decision graph. Yeah.
Knowledge graphs. That's the one I was looking for. Yeah. Brilliant. So I've got a question here that's going to force some opinions, or maybe not. I don't know. Should we get into talks about source of truth, and where is the source of truth when it comes to tokens? Where should design tokens live? Where should they be defined? Well, I think it's interesting. Where is the source of truth? And I just want to hear your take on that without anything else. Dan?
It depends.
Not even trying to be diplomatic, but I genuinely feel it's the shape of the team and the workflow that should dictate that. At the end of the day, if you're talking specifically about tokens, it's a JSON file, typically. So if you forget about that bit for a minute, then we're storing some design decisions that need to be executed in some way through some code somewhere. And so if you have more designers than engineers, then maybe the weighting should be that way. If it depends on the workflow of what you're working with, it just has to. You can't have a one size fits all for everyone.
Kaelig?
Yeah, it depends. For me, it depends on the customer value you're trying to provide. There are some teams that will want to have a design system that is brandable, and some call this kind of a headless design system where, let's say you're a web agency and you want to create a design system that you can reuse from customer to customer, or you're a big brand with so many sub-brands that you need to create a token system that allows for that branding for each sub-brand. I don't know how much of this should be. I mean, the source of truth might need to live in every single code base that you create. Like, for example, iOS theming might be different from Android theming. That might be different from web theming. And so there are some decisions that maybe will need to be taken on the edges where this happens in the code. Whereas some decisions might need to be taken at the design level. And so you could have a mix. Like, you could totally have a mix of certain decisions being taken and sourced in the design, and some others at the engineering level. Ideally, you don't end up in that in a mess like this, but it's totally like if that delivers customer value, this is where you should go. And so for me, it depends. There's no. Yeah, and again, the shape of the team, I totally agree with Dan. I've seen teams with like maybe one front-end developer. Do they have time to maintain and create a whole workflow to deliver design tokens with a source of truth in code? Maybe not. I don't know. That's it's a tough question.
Do we think that it's achievable to? I've had this. I think I've talked to you about it before, Kaelig. I've got this idea that the source of truth could sit outside of everything and be in a centralized location that kind of has the two-way sync in and out, with some kind of governance for deciding what is, what is main, right, and what are branches. Do we think that there's actually value in that, or do we think that it is something that is probably realistically going to sit sort of on one end of a team?
I think it's an interesting space, right? We've talked about this a few times because it is between lots of disciplines. And I think if you forget about implementation of it, then how does your workflow with the communication bit arrive at a decision? If you have a balance of equal in that team, then you can work out who's best placed to have that responsibility. If you have an unbalanced team, then that would probably dictate the greater resource should have that responsibility. But to me, that consensus and having that communication is just the vital part of it before you get down to what the tokens are.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, moving on.
But what I think is important here is to remember that this is just the beginning. Tokens are a few years old. They were coined as the name design tokens by Gina and John at Salesforce, and it was maybe 2014 or 15 when they called it that way. And I think the tooling space is going to evolve massively. The fact that there's a specification around it will make it way easier to ask ourselves those questions and to reason about interrupt between tools and between design and code. So it's just the beginning, is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's really exciting to see what's going to happen. I mean, the fact that even the core tools have started to implement, tokens. Sketch just releasing their first foray into tokens natively, and I would be very surprised if Figma weren't following soon. I have no insider information, so I'm not promising that. Okay, I've got a call for advice here. Mobile, the awful design system problems that come up with mobile. Are there any recommendations that either of you have for implementing tokens elegantly on mobile? Seen a lot of great examples on the web, but not as many on mobile. Or do you tend to see that there is just sort of like that global implementation that kind of just pushes out and, you deal with the intricacies later?
I think I'll probably have quite a short answer, so Kaelig can take this in a second. But we're at the stage now where we know we can't do it immediately. So we're working on that comms bit and try and work it through. The way that our apps are built, I think we're relatively confident that alongside the web expression of a value, you could easily have different ways of translating it. So not automatically translated, but if you had a color value, for example, we've got an idea of how we might express that in a token format for whatever platforms might want to consume it in the right format. So again, it's not using an automated process to do it. We feel we've got control. We're storing the values together where there is common expression. And Kaelig's right. There's lots of times where you will want to defer and say, this is a global set of things. This makes sense to share. And then some values where you think, well, actually, is this the right place for it? Maybe it is for your workflow, maybe it isn't. But we're getting to the point where we know we could consume from the core set of tokens and incorporate that both into the server-side stuff and the client-side release. But the problem then comes with how do you sync up that implementation when it comes to actually releasing a new update to the client. It gets a lot messier then, because the web, we're very fortunate. We got really quick feedback loop like Kaelig was talking about there. You can push it out, boom, there it is. The way our apps work currently, we've got some stuff done server side, most of it in the client. So that's a little more complicated.
Have you found any ways to get around that apart from moving everything server side?
We're still too early in that conversation, to be honest. It's gonna be a way off, but I think we've got some ideas. We've got a few rough proof of concepts, but we know that we can do it. We just haven't got to the actual doing. I think we've got some degree of confidence.
Very interesting. Kaelig, is anything to add there?
I don't have that much experience working. I mean, I did work closely with the mobile teams at Shopify, but I found that even when we started talking about React Native, they came up with their own design token system, and they actually released it. It's a whole styling library. It's open source. It's on the Shopify GitHub org. They wrote articles about it, and even the UX team was that I was working closely with was not necessarily aware of these things. So it's just to tell you how, when you're a bigger organization, there are going to be pockets of knowledge that are going to be created without knowledge of the design system team itself. And it totally made sense for them, by the way. Like, I'm not saying this was bad. I think it is good to have. I mean, for us, it made sense anyway. So just to say, it's not an easy one. There are things I would do differently in the future, that just to ensure that there is trust, there is this thing. One thing I would say, though, is design so mobile teams have way, I don't want to say better. They have more mature ways of thinking about. They have more mature ways of thinking about CI/CD because they have continuous integration, continuous deployment. Because the way they do QA, etc., is, I think, very advanced. They've been going through so many generations of manual QA and then automation in the cloud, and people who tend to work on mobile also tend to have stronger engineering chops, from what I can see, and are more geared towards automation and automation. I think they've come up with some really cool stuff like visual regression testing, which is way easier today than it used to be on the web. All the teams that I saw work at Shopify had that by default, like on all of their screens. Performance testing, scroll performance testing, those kind of things. Manual QA. They also had processes that I think beat the web teams. And I think that was really good to see that putting tokens in their stack was very easy in a certain way, because it revealed all the places where it impacted the product. Whereas on some other web stacks where there was not that much automation, we had so much like really good unit testing and integration testing, but not that much visual testing. And it was kind of scary on the web, whereas on the mobile, it felt super confident. So I think that's one way to do it nicely on mobile and elegantly, is to have all these test suites that tell you if you're breaking something. Especially, I'm not an expert. I wouldn't even know how to test the mobile apps personally. So when I come to these teams and be like, hey, here's a dependency, if they're, oh, sure, let's drop it in, see what happens, because their tests are going to tell them that something's broken, that's the best case scenario for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it does. It just makes sense. And I really do wish that we would build out better visual regression testing for the web.
I think that that's one of the things that we put in straight from the beginning. Again, because we learned from this things that weren't design systems, like sharing stuff. Just building on that word confidence again. If you push a change, make sure it's a deliberate change. And so having VRT on the pipeline was just an essential.
Yeah. I've got one last question before I wrap it up. Unless you guys just answer it within 20 seconds. And it is a pretty broad one, but I think it's an important one for probably a lot of people who are still listening. Stakeholder buy-in. What are your go-to ways to get stakeholder buy-in when it comes to these? I suppose not just design tokens, but any kind of this, broad, ranging impact, like change that will have sort of this wide an impact. Especially when you're dealing with sort of less mature product teams. Do you have any advice?
I can try and make some up.
I suppose, Kaelig, do you have any advice, or are you in the similar boat?
I'm to be honest, I'm still trying to figure it out. Depending on the org and who I'm reporting to, are they engineering, are they marketing, are they design? And I feel like a big part of design ops is actually stakeholder alignment on tooling initiatives, on process initiatives. And so yourself, you're very passionate about this topic. And so you probably have more thoughts than we do from the rest of the industry and yourself. But for me, there are times where it's hard, because if you're reporting into a hierarchy who doesn't get it, you have so much education and advocacy work to do that it can be very taxing cognitively. And instead of doing the work, you spend so much of your work advocating for doing the work. And it takes a lot of energy, but it's also part of what I love doing, is talk about these issues, creating the forums, creating the communities of craft around, okay, how do we talk about this stuff? Do we care about working like this? Should we make it happen at scale? And again, it depends on the team size. If you're just a company of 20 people, maybe that you know everybody's names and it's totally fine. You can scale something very quickly. But when you do something that is going to scale to teams in the numbers of like dozens of teams, hundreds of people, thousands of people, all of a sudden you have to spend way more time advocating. There are times where you have somebody in your hierarchy who's done that advocacy work, who gets it, and the best they can ask you is something like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Let's say you roll it out.
Yeah.
Can we unroll it? Can we roll it back?
Yeah.
Is it cool? Like, is it? and so for me, that's happened also. And that was really nice.
What's the worst that can happen is one of the best ways to convince anyone, isn't it?
I think we were quite lucky as in like we started off relatively small. There were low expectations, and so we tried to find a lot of good news stories and put in that extra effort for a particular thing that would help it to resonate, because then there's a clear kind of connection between what we were talking about and value. So people that weren't that close to it, they kind of helped in some way to become advocates. So that was quite a lucky position in a way, because there was a program of work we needed to get through. And if we said, okay, we can help with that, and we know we can do it because of design system stuff, you don't need to know about that. So what is it you want to make? And what do you want to say? And just shift the conversation onto let's do the right thing. And with the components in the design system being solutions to problems, if the problems that you have in saying this messaging, I think that's a solution for that. That's a solution for that. Oh, here's an interesting thing you found. Great. So that we've reduced the effort down from all of this down to that. And so there's a few things where we're quite fortunate. As things went, we could go, boom, there you go. And it really helps tell the value story very, very tangibly.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I think especially with things like tokens, it's like, what, you know, you've got your arguments around, oh, this will speed up your efficiency. This will sort of make you more efficient as a team. It'll increase quality and consistency. Basically all the things that design systems in general help with. But I think building out something quickly and showing how it works is probably one of the best ways to actually convince somebody. And I think from there, it's basically you just need, to me, you need the champions. You need the champions on either side. Like, you need to convince somebody who has influence in on the design and the product side, and you need to convince somebody who has influence on the engineering side of the value of this. I mean, if you can't get that, then you're probably going to have a pretty hard time, right? But from there, I think it's like, you know, once you've got that buy-in, it's usually pretty easy to then use those champions to go up with those arguments around, you know, what is it that people care about? They care about that their people are going to be happier, that they're going to be able to produce more things faster.
I think there's something as well with talking to the product community and being like, don't get wedded to a particular design.
Definitely,
it's a system. And so the system will change deliberately. And your stuff might change, but it's for the best of reasons, and all of these people will be involved.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, being happy with change.
Yeah. And then Ken, sorry, we didn't get to touch much on the marketing side of the question, but it seems that for me, product and marketing are two different worlds in terms of release cadence. A lot of the time, marketing can put out something in the world and take it back. It puts multiple things out there on a very, very short release cadence, and whereas product you have to keep iterating, and it's like a work in progress for a long time. And I don't have any experience with talking to marketing teams about design tokens, so I'd be curious to hear more in the future. Hopefully there's a how we document that is talking about that.
I was going to say everybody can come to my TED talk about good org design. But no, I mean, to be honest, one of the quickest fire ways to improve the way that marketing could work with something like tokens is to make sure that your marketing design team work very closely with your product design team, and that there is that conversation going across. Because I think that having those two design teams separate is one of the biggest recipes for disaster in most organizations. But anyway, we're unfortunately at time now. So thank you so much to Dan and Kaelig for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I could probably sit here for a few more hours chatting about this, but unfortunately I've got dinner to eat. So we will be posting this up on the YouTube and on the Zero Height blog in the next few days. We'll make sure that we email out to everybody to let you know when that happens. Yes, keep an eye on the email and keep an eye on the Zero Height social media. Or if you're in Zeros, we'll also be in there if you want to ask any more questions, and I can pass them on to Kaelig and Dan, or we might even be able to convince them to come in for a little while at some point. Brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you, and thank you to everybody who joined today. And I suppose the only thing to say now is to have an awesome rest of your Tuesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, chat, for the great questions. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.